Okay, looks like we are getting the indication that we are live, and so we will leisurely start this one so that the crowd can kind of gather in and come join us as time goes on. These things, when you hit go live, the notifications get sent out, emails get thrown at people, and all kinds of fun things happen. So we're gonna just look at a screen of non-moving planets. There you go. I got them moving again. You got a Sky Safari, you got to baby it sometimes to get the planets to move, which is a little bit crazy. But while we're waiting for a few more people to join in, we'll welcome a few people from the chat room. There's Steve Olson. He says, "Hey, Will, just sitting in if you don't mind." We don't mind at all. We love that you're here, Steve. It's good to have you. Osvaldo hanging out with us. Hola, he says. Looks like we're getting everybody in. Frank Kinney, how you doing, brother? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Mr. Stephen Hummel, the one and only, our friend from.
Steven, how you doing, man?
Yeah, the man, the myth, the legend from McDonald Observatory. There he is. Tardigrade is who Frank Kinney runs under on all the social media. So we're gonna hang out with him. We're gonna hang out with these panel of awesome astronomers that we have here this evening for the Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas. So while we're doing that, I want to just bring us up and get into it. So it's Saturday night. It's June 13th. And it's 7:14 p.m. here in Central Time. I think everyone here is in Central. We're all in Texas, basically. We're just spread throughout this glorious land. And we're gonna do some astronomy. Basically tonight, is the second night of a 2-night event that we're having with our sister club from Austin, the Austin Astronomical Society, or AAS, who Don Davies just might happen to be a member of down there. We're going to talk to her here in a few seconds, and we'll get to some intros as everybody's kind of joining in, and we'll get to some comments while everybody's kind of getting in. And there's Courtney. We'd love to have Courtney with us. Good to see you, Courtney.
Hey, Courtney.
Someone needs to represent Venus. Yeah, well, it's a little hard for us to all orbit around each other, but we'll try to. We'll do our best, Steve. Yes, Stephen had a great show last night. We might talk about that here in a little bit too. Hello, Gregory from Wiley, Texas. I think that's where Wiley, isn't that in Texas? I think so. You guys can probably help me with that, maybe. Stephen saying thanks, guys. Mark Jackson in the house, all the way from Europe, joining us all the time. It's good to have you, dude. It's great. It's always great to have you. Hey, there's Joshua. Nice to see you, dude. Good to have you here. So, again, this is the Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas's June meeting. I guess we're in June. It still feels like March or something. I don't know, but we're halfway through the summer, it seems. And we're going to continue to have these meetings online as to not get too close to each other. We're still doing the physical distancing thing, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So we're gonna do that while we hang out with some of our regulars and members of the club. There's Mr. Lonnie Mosley, one of the best visual observers I know and a really good friend of mine. Good to see you, Mr. Lonnie.
Hey, Lonnie.
Eddie and Kat are here with us. Bill and Mary Dixon are here. Cool, awesome. Everybody's kind of joining in. Good to have you, Bill and Mary. Nova Scotia, look at that. Awesome. Thanks, Stan. Thanks for joining us. There's an international crowd this evening, guys. This is awesome. And the one and only Mr. Brian Lippincott, the man, the myth, and also the legend. There's so many legends in here. It's ridiculous. So we're going to get back to some of y'all's comments here in a second, guys. I want to get to some intros, and then we're going to get to Dawn's talk about constellations and the cultures and folklore behind it. It's an awesome talk. I got to take it in at the Texas Star Party. I believe that was 2019, Dawn? 2018?
2017.
Good grief. Are you serious? That long ago?
Yeah, 2017.
Man, now how the time flies. So we get the updated version, and it's going to be awesome stuff, and I can't wait to see it. So what we'll do then is we'll get to some intros, and since Eddie and Kat are on my screen up in here, and they're on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, one of the old bridges. Eddie, how long did that take you to build, man? It's good to see you.
Oh, it took me all morning. Yeah, I went to Home Depot like 12 times.
I hope you wore a mask, though.
yeah, I did.
Okay, so Eddie and Kat are our good friends. They're in Killeen, Texas, and they're kind of hanging out there. They're normally from Beaumont, but we'll just go ahead and say they're from Killeen at this particular juncture, or they're from the Starship Enterprise there. And Eddie is our treasurer for the Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas. And after we get through the intros, we're going to talk to him briefly about some club business. We'll get all that out of the way. But Eddie and Kat, it's great to see you guys face to face again. It's awesome.
Good to see y'all.
Lonnie says, "Hey, Eddie and Kat."
Hey, Lonnie.
Good times. And then next to them on my screen, we have the one and only Mrs. Dawn Davies. And Dawn happens to be from the heart of Texas, out there in Austin. And she's an avid amateur astronomer, just like the rest of us. Brilliant visual observer, very dedicated. I've seen her at almost all the Texas star parties that I've been to, except for this last one, which wasn't really a Texas star party. It was kind of a absentee star party. But Dawn, it's so great to have you with us. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Now you run a little project, and I'll put the banner up real quick. Like there's only 50 buttons here to push. You run Earthbound Astronomer. Tell us a little bit about that real quick.
I do. So it's just a personal project I've been working on for some time. It originally started out as sort of a platform to just assist amateur astronomers by providing them analysis and assessments of state parks that are optimum for viewing. As we know, the state parks have a large amount of land, which means they aren't near a lot of developments, so they tend to have dark skies. We have a large number of state parks here in Texas that are wonderful, dark, low Bortle numbers, great places to observe. And that project kind of became much larger, much bigger, providing educational resources for teachers, for science communicators, for anybody who pretty much wants to learn more about astronomy. And where that's taken me now is sort of Earthbound Astronomer's newest direction, is a platform I've called Astronomy for All. So it's finding ways to make astronomy accessible to everyone. So a lot of the work I'm doing in developing resources will eventually be translated and be bilingual. And hopefully a lot more resources will become available for the audible and visually impaired and challenged. So we're trying to make astronomy available to everyone, regardless of your knowledge and regardless of your ability.
That's fantastic. And that's exactly what we, especially at Asset, that's what we love, because we love seeing people doing outreach. I know I talked about this last night on y'all's meeting. We're a heavy outreach club, and we really appreciate everything the Austin club is doing, because y'all have a few more people over toward the Austin way than we do down here in Beaumont. But yeah, there's just a few more. But that's awesome. It's great to have you, Dawn, as always. I've been wanting to get you over. We're actually going to have you come over in person before the whole 2020 thing happened, which is what we'll call it from here on out, the 2020 thing. And but this is even better. So you didn't have to drive to meet us, and you didn't have to stay in some weird hotel. Yeah, I love it.
I love the partnership that we formed. I think we really need to work on this sort of I think, as I mentioned, a cross-pollination of people, of professionals. I mean, we all have a shared love, but we all tend to have a skill or an aptitude that may be stronger in some areas. And I think we all have a lot to teach each other about this wonderful hobby we all share.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Go through some of these comments real quick while we're getting prepped up for some club business. It's great to have everybody here with us. Good to see you guys. All the regulars in the chat, of course. I am broadcasting on Facebook and YouTube. We're actually out to like 3 different sources, so we're being broadcast all over the world, it seems, which is very cool. Greg's right next to Plano. There we go. Lots of Texas in the house tonight. Mm-hmm. And Mark says, like, where is Eddie and Kat? The background is interesting. They're on the Enterprise, my friend.
Yeah.
And Courtney says, I was wondering if they were on the bridge. Absolutely. Number one. You can tell we watch Next Generation a lot before bedtime. Courtney's actually like, don't turn it off yet. I'm watching this. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, okay. Lonnie Mosley says, hi, Dawn. Lonnie Mosley. I don't know if you know Lonnie Mosley. Maybe you do.
I don't know if we've personally met, but we've met now.
There you go. greetings from Peru. Look at that, all the way from Peru. And there's Terry Rhodes, the man himself, hanging out with us. Now, before we get into it, I wanted to do a quick shout out to my club real quick and to my friends Eddie and Kat here. This polo that I'm wearing is very super awesome. You can see it says my name, the club name, and then Master Observer on there. So they had this polo made for me when I became Master Observer. And I was actually able to get it before all this 2020 nonsense happened. But this is my first time to really kind of wear it on a meeting because we haven't had the opportunity, and then I kept forgetting. And then but here we are. So thank you, Eddie and Kat. This is awesome. I'll cherish this for a long time to come.
You earned it. You earned it, Will.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Y'all are amazing. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Eddie and Kat Trevino so that they can take us through the finances of our club. I know this is going to be so insanely interesting to everybody, but it actually is. Why don't y'all let us know how we're doing as a financial institution there, Eddie and Kat?
All right, so we're actually doing pretty good. I want to do a plug on our incoming finances. You know, normally in January, we get a lot more money from club memberships. So as the months go on, we don't bring as much in, but Amazon Smile, we consistently get money in every quarter. And this last quarter, we got $74.05 free money just from Amazon. If you go to Amazon Smile and you put in our club as your charity, we get money for every purchase you make, 0.05% on every dollar. So totally, since we have done it, Will has it up there, we've gotten $1,145.17 since 2016. So free money. Keep buying from Amazon and sending money our way.
It doesn't cost the purchaser anything. This is something that comes from Amazon, and I'm assuming it's a tremendous tax break for them. But it benefits.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's
183 million mark.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the Amazon Smile Prime thing here, just make sure it says supporting. I assume y'all can see what I'm doing here on the screen. And hopefully that little pop-up is showing up too. But there you go. If you do shop on Amazon and you do want to support our club, we would love to have your money. Like Kat said, we would love to get some of this $183 million. I guess we have, we just got a very small percentage. Yeah, so all you have to do is go to smile.amazon.com and then search for the Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas and put it in there. And again, that money does not come out of your pocket. It comes out of Jeff Bezos's space money fund. So you want to go ahead and take care of that. So but thank you, Eddie and Kat. That was awesome. Did I interrupt y'all? Was there anything else?
No, the last thing I want to say is we will have an outgoing expense. We have to pay our dues to the society, and we have 43 families right now. So we'll be sending that check off, and we'll get an updated roster to everyone.
Fantastic.
I think that's the most families we've had so far.
Yeah, I think you're right. What would you say? 45?
43.
43. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I think 41 or 42 has been the most in the past. So we were breaking records even in a year like 2020. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now we will be talking to Mr. Eddie Trevino in a minute about some solar activity. So you're going to want to definitely stick around for that because he's got some stuff that's definitely changing. So we're going to talk about that after Dawn's talk. So I think it'll be actually really interesting to hear what the sun is doing toward the end of the program. So, but right now, what we're going to do is turn it over to Dawn herself. And now, Dawn, you did this talk, like I said, at Texas Star Party, which was almost 4 years ago, which sounds absolutely ridiculous and absurd because time flies, right? But it's super cool. And I've been wanting to get you to come to the club and do this for a good long while, where you do kind of here is this constellation, and then here is what all these cultures thought about it and all this stuff. I think it's really interesting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll let you share your screen
Awesome.
whenever you're ready, and you can get us on in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, I first gave this talk to AAS back in 2013. So this has actually been a production of 7 years. It's really just an interest for me. I studied classical mythology in college, and I've always been interested in mythology of various cultures. It's actually the reason why we named our son Apollo, although it does fit into many various science-based areas. But yeah, so it's one of those things that, you know, I think we all sort of are curious in general about the constellations, but we're gonna delve a little bit deeper. So let me get my screen share going.
Love it. There we go. I'll add that to the stream. Woohoo! Yeah, get the dance in. There we go.
That's so trippy. All right.
It's like Spock's mirror. All right, there we go. And you are full screen.
All right. And it's also had various changes in its name, and it's an amorphous sort of a project we've got going here. Let's see. Here we go. So the way I kind of looked at it is that, you know, for literally thousands of years, humankind has gazed up at the stars, and I think we have a natural inclination towards anthropomorphism. Cultures have found patterns in the points of light in the sky, and these cultures have given stories to the shapes that they've identified. It's described the world around them. They use the constellations to guide them through their daily lives. Certain constellations, when they rise in the sky or set in the sky, it heralds onsets of seasons, and it directs them when to harvest and when to sow. It provides them, you know, both a physical and in some ways a moral compass, I feel. You know, before we got into this arena of cartography, you know, there were constellations. So for the purposes of this talk, I wanted to take a look at cultures across various countries and regions on either side of the equator, northern and southern hemisphere. And when I started this, it was just, you know, a very small subset, only about 3 or 4 cultures that I looked at. And that slowly grew because I wanted to look at wider similarities, like I said, on either side of the hemispheres, because there are some constellations that are shared in our night sky, and that aren't specifically, you know, restrictive to just one region. So I started looking at, you know, the indigenous American tribes just within the United States, the Maya of the regions that are now Mexico, the Taino of the Caribbean, the Inca along the west coast of South America. We looked into the Nordic cultures of Northern Europe and Norse mythology, which is a huge favorite of mine. Tales of ancient Egyptians, tribes of South Africa, astronomy in Mesopotamia. We're going to talk about some stories from India, ancient Chinese, Aboriginal tales from Australia, and stories from the people of the Polynesian Islands. And to understand how the tales arose from these cultures and what they saw in the night sky, I felt it necessary to kind of delve a little bit deeper. And so we're gonna dip our toes in a little bit of archaeoastronomy. So first, we're going to take a look at these specific regions within North America that are specific to the indigenous Americans. So we have the Medicine Wheel in northern Wyoming. We're going to look, and you're going to see a lot of trends as far as wheels are very common, henges, buttes. You'll start seeing a lot of common designs, and in all ways, these have some kind of astronomical purpose, whether it's, you know, identifying the solstices and the equinoxes in certain areas, or the rising of specific stars or constellations. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Chaco Canyon and the Chaco culture of the National Historic Park. They're astronomical markings and petroglyphs related to solar and lunar and cardinal directions of the Chacoan and Pueblo people. And at the Woodhenge in Cahokia in Southwest Illinois, the placements, those markings, denoted solstices and equinoxes. And these were actually used by the Mississippian culture, the indigenous civilization. They were very much into mound building. And in this region, Cahokia was actually their largest city and was a religious center. So in a lot of ways, there's a tie-in to both the astronomical purposes, that there's a lot of commonality with religion as well as and gathering places. You know, these were landmarks that were important and specific to these cultures, which, you know, is in many cases no more prominent than you know, in this region here. You know, you're talking about Chichen Itza, you're talking about El Caracol and Teotihuacan. You know, Teotihuacan was the ancient Mesopotamian city, and it boasted a population at its height of over 100,000 people. And despite their temples being named for the sun, Temple of the Sun and Temple of the Moon, there is no direct astronomical affiliation, but within the streets, the street alignments, they have found align with the setting points of the Pleiades, what it's observed at its highest point. And there's a lot of mythical connection to the Pleiades and Quetzalcoatl, that was their feathered serpent. In Oaxaca, Mexico, their fortress here was both tactical in nature and astronomical. So there was a north-south alignment, and there are arrow shapes alongside the building that appear to point towards specific stars, and said to track the times relating to not only the astronomical movement, but when offerings were made to the gods. So at this time, you know, you can see how there would almost be a very thin line, delineating between, you know, what we kind of envision as astronomy and astrology. There's a lot of religious elements in these ancient cultures. We're going to move down into to the Caribbean, and this was actually one of the newer cultures that I started researching and looking at. Excuse me, looking at their myth and their archaeoastronomy sites. I mean, I never really thought of considering, you know, that there'd be any kind of archaeoastronomical sites here, but, you know, they obviously have a lot of areas that, again, were used for ceremonial ritual, especially this Caguana barrio in Puerto Rico. So you've got this, you know, round circle of rocks, these little monoliths. And they've also found petroglyphs as well, engravings that clearly depict astronomical events, predominantly equinoxes and solstices, obviously because these were very defining periods of the seasons. So, you know, these agrarian cultures relied on the equinoxes and solstices to really tell them in a time basis, you know, again, as I mentioned earlier, when to harvest, when to sow, when to plant, and guided them. In some ways, the rising of constellations in the sky, as we'll talk about later, in Egyptian cultures denoted when the Nile would rise. So that was pretty important. You needed to know when that Nile was going to come in and flood the area. But getting back to the Caribbean cultures here. So the Lucayan Arawak village, they analyzed these stone-lined courts, and looking at about 1500, the Common Era. And so the court actually acted as a calendric device. So it was, again, keyed into the solstices and the equinoxes, but it also incorporated observations of high magnitude stars that were in this sort of orbital synchronized pattern with the sun during key solar events. So they were very clued into a lot of solar activity in these regions. And that was the same with Greencastle Hill in Antigua. Both this site being a ritualistic site, but also what they believe it to be is an ancient observatory. And the stones are grouped and resemble actually the stars of Sagittarius. Moving down into the Inca region, and this is where we're going to have a lot of fun talking about the constellations of the Inca, because they have a very unique interpretation of looking at what they call dark constellations. So the voids in between the stars, and then seeing some unique patterns. And as a culture, as a society, they possessed a tremendous amount of knowledge about the climate, the seasons, and particularly its influence on their agriculture. They were very religiously tied to astronomical worshiping of various gods. They had a Viracocha, which was the creator. Inti was the sun, Quila was the moon. So they saw the gods in the stars and in the mountains and the rivers. There was a very strong connection with them. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of their constellations, what they consider constellations, were dark constellations, so these voids. And Machu Picchu was actually designed with geodesic alignment. So the astronomical alignments within the city cover the entire celestial year, not just specifically capturing, four main events. And in Cusco in Peru, the city lies on radial plans. So it mimics the sky, pointing to astronomical events on the horizon, much like we saw in Teotihuacan. And up in this area in La Silla, the petroglyphs they have found, these really complex designs etched in rocks, and also together with sets of standing stones. They've studied those and surmised that they actually marked the stars of Canopus and Hadar. And La Silla is actually a site of a huge facility built and operated by the European Southern Observatory. So even today, it's carrying out astronomical work. But they figure that this site has been utilized for stargazers for at least 1,700 years. Moving up into our northernmost region that I've been researching, the predominant focus astronomically and the constellation myths are predominantly derived from Norse mythology, like many ancient mythologies, connecting gods and their acts and their deeds to cosmology. And most of the tales that come from this region are actually documented in two books called the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda that were written during the Viking Age. So the Viking people that were occupying what we know as present-day Denmark and Sweden, Norway, and parts of Germany. And they have a lot of interesting elements. You see the sort of henge structures, you see these stone megaliths and monoliths, and then you have these interesting grooves. The Gotland grooves are fascinating. And they have found 3,600 grooves to date, cut into over 700 boulders. And they're thought that these are astronomical markings, possibly sight lines toward celestial phenomena. And they're littered about the island in the Baltic Sea. It's pretty phenomenal. I really hope I get to go visit someday. And these stones up here in southern Sweden, these ale stones, definitely megalithic sculptures and structures, putting them a mark about 1,000 years ago, so towards the end of the Iron Age, that also acted as a burial monument, which is interesting because if anybody has done any research into Stonehenge, the more work they do, the more they look at the area surrounding, they've definitely found an association, not only with the astronomical alignments, but also with it being a burial ground. And so here you've got a total of 59 boulders that not only are angled towards the sunset direction of the summer solstices and possibly some moon alignments, but they also form the outline of a ship. I thought it was very, very Viking, very typical of the region. So we're going to jump a little down to another favorite of mine of the ancient Egyptians. And so here we've got, very classic example. Everyone knows the Great Pyramids of Giza and their astronomical orientation, not to mention the general measurements. So, how they stand exactly at points on the Earth that are, 1/3 the way between the equator and the North Pole, and their axial alignment. But for those that aren't familiar, so the pyramids themselves were designed to depict the three stars of Orion, and they're not perfectly aligned. They're slightly offset, which is possible due to stellar drift. But their orientation to the Nile recreates Orion and Orion's belt, and the Nile being the Milky Way. And I found that just fascinating, the fact that they would make these associations so long ago. And going into Abu Simbel, the solar exposure in the temple on a biannual basis illuminates scriptures on the walls, which just I don't know, for me, it's totally Indiana Jones right there. And it happens twice a year. And strangely enough, it happens on a king's birthday and coronation, and that's specific to Ramses II, who it was built by, or at least built during his reign. And going down to the Nabata Playa in Nubia, these stones, again, stone structures, very common theme, sport 4 gateways along the cardinal direction. So again, going back to solstices and equinoxes. And then there are 6 irregular stars placed in the center that appear to match up to individual stars that, of course, as we discussed before, a little bit less accurate than they used to be just because of stellar drift. Stars do move. So this will change over time. Moving on to South Africa. I love getting into the tribal myths and the history. There's a unique perspective that I think they take, and the themes that I've seen, the commonalities of the types of civilizations versus how they interpreted the sky and how they portrayed their interpretations. So in the Western Cape of South Africa, we have the sand rock art called Khoisan, and it's the Bushman people, and they're actually scattered all about Southern Africa. And this pictorial representation they've found ranges from documenting comets and bolides. So historians have found that the rocks could also be a surrealist concept related to trance state that is important to the shamans of these tribes. But the fact that this is one of the few cultures that has documented comets and large bolides or large meteors is fascinating. It makes me wonder, what, of course, because of lack of light pollution, what the meteor showers must have been like back in the time. Moving on to the Kenyan Rift Valley, they have, again, pillars that are aligned with star systems. So not just stars and not just set up to the equinoxes or the solstices, but to star systems, to Triangulum, Pleiades, Bellatrix, Aldebaran, Central Orion, Scythe, and Sirius. So that's fascinating that they were looking at the actual star systems themselves. And then we see here in Madagascar these fascinating dolmens. So these chambered structures with these sort of vertical megaliths and a horizontal capstone. It's almost like a section pulled out of something like Stonehenge. And these are oriented towards equinox and solstice sunrises and sunsets, and also associated with possible burial sites. But here for them, it's actually an interpretation of the passage of life through the rising and setting of the sun. And I just found that to be tremendously poetic. Moving on to Mesopotamia, here we start getting into culture that has a very structured, very mathematical sense of astronomy. The Babylonian arts of astronomy and mathematics were key to the people of the time in Babylon. Astronomy was their basis for recording of celestial objects. And these are found on Sumerian clay tablets. So this was one of the first situations where they're actually documenting these, in sort of the precursor to books and literature. And a focus was placed on select groups of stars and constellations. And this was later adapted and developed, and these myths sort of transcended into the Hellenistic and Greek astronomy that we're a little bit more familiar with today. But they were actually the first to sort of apply mathematics to their observations. Excuse me. It's believed that actually the first astronomical record was compiled during the fourth ruler of Hammurabi. And these tablets recorded the rise of Venus and its first and last visibility on the horizon. And these observations are insane. They kept these observations recorded over a 21-year period. So they're extremely well documented. And then the movement of the skies in Petra determined the way in which the monuments and cities in the area were actually erected. The Nabatean structures marked the events of the sun and the moon and the stars. During the winter solstice, the light of the setting sun would enter through the gates of the monument and illuminate, again, sacred motab. So there's a podium where these stone blocks represent divinities of their gods. So very similar to what we were talking about before, you know, that sort of light cast through this ancient ruin. Again, I just keep thinking Indiana Jones and the staff with the big red gem on the top. A real fun one for me is moving on to archaeoastronomy in India, which is fascinating because here you get into a lot of the mechanisms of astronomy and observing. In Agra, Uttar Pradesh, this Giyadi city is the literal translation is 11 steps, and this was actually an astronomical observatory that was erected by the emperor of the time, and it overlooked, if you walked up the steps, it overlooked these hemispheres, hemispheric cavities where celestial readings were taken. The emperor at the time was obsessed with astronomy, and so it manifests into a very interesting process. And he actually started using planetary alignment to sort of manage business and negotiations, which I thought was kind of an interesting take. No more associating with the growing of grains and such. We're going to do our business dealings based on the stars. Moving on to Jantar Mantar. This observatory was designed to follow the lunar, solar, and celestial movement with a total of 19 astronomical instruments. And these were all instruments that allowed for observations to be made with the unaided eye, so no lenses or mirrors of the like. And these instruments operate in at least one of three systems. So they encapsulate the ecliptic, the equatorial, and horizon, zenith as we know it, and alt-az, which is fascinating that they have these instrumentation that incorporate all of those aspects. Nuluralu is this megalithic monument. Again, you have these stone arrangements that again are calendarly equinoxes and solstices, directions of sunrise. So I'm sure by now you're kind of getting the themes through here. Excuse me. Moving on to China. Now I will tell you, I don't delve into it enough in this presentation. I could do an entire presentation just on Chinese astronomy because it is fascinating. Pardon me while I take a sip of water. I'm sure you're not surprised to know that they are very structured, very focused, very methodical in their astronomy. Their constellations are set based on cardinal directions, and each cardinal direction has a corresponding color and a corresponding animal, and it's this amazing construct of mansions. And it's, like I said, I could go on and on about the structure, but it should not be any surprise that a culture like the Chinese would have this in place. And so in Denfeng, in the eastern China, Henan province, the Chinese capital, this was considered the only point where astronomical calculations were accurate. So I found that very interesting, very matter of fact. In Kaifeng, this is one of the 7 ancient capitals of China, and it's the location of a natural museum of natural history, which housed this amazing, phenomenal, intricate astronomical clock tower. I encourage you to go look it up. It's just the woodwork and the mechanisms and the labor that went into creating that is phenomenal. And then moving to Beijing, to this ancient observatory, this pre-telescopic observatory, and it's actually home to a lot of the astronomical equipment from Kaifeng, from eastern China. Down into Australia, again, I could make a whole presentation on Australian Aboriginal mythos and how it relates to astronomy, because it is just it's beautiful and it's colorful and descriptive, and the Aboriginals believed that the stories, the myths of the constellations came to them during this dream time. So it's almost I don't know, whenever I read into it and study into it, I see just these amazing creatures, this giant emu that you see here, these rock engravings. It's phenomenal. So all of their stone arrangements up there in Victoria, those were all with solar alignment purposes. Nildadi in South Australia, that is a etched lunar calendar rock engravings there. So a lot with rocks, a lot of very large depictions, as you can see in the image with Northern Sydney. You know, that's one of those that you can see from an airplane above in the sky. One of the things I wanted to make sure, as I did with the people of the Caribbean islands, was to include the island nations, because there is so much wonderful, colorful mythos and stories that come out of these areas. So here in particular, in Tonga, you're talking about these, again, sort of megalithic stones with those top caps there. And it's actually coral limestone slabs. They've dated these back to about the 13th century. And again, they tell the positions of solstices and equinoxes, again, a common theme here. Moving into the Federated States of Micronesia, this city had orientated their structures, their cities, their streets towards Orion's belt and the Southern Cross, which was a significant asterism for them for navigational purposes, because they were a seafaring culture, a seafaring civilization. And then down into Rictia, you're looking at this construction was around about 1450 AD, and it's a solar platform that allows for alignments with cardinal directions, was used for celestial solstice observations. And fortunately, it's been made a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which I hope the majority of these are. So one of the things I wanted to look at, not just in comparison of the constellation myth, but to see if there's any commonality across the types of archaeoastronomical sites. So here we get a sense out of the cultures that I've been researching, which ones, have wheel structures or use the henge structures. And I'm still doing research into the commonalities. Is there a thread based on the terrain or the geography that yields more direction towards these specific designs? So we move on again, and here we've got sort of an interesting take. We've looking at the structures in the cities that have been built or used for astronomical purposes. So you've got kind of a cluster of them over. If you look at the cultures of ancient Mesopotamia, of Egypt, of India, you've got sort of this little line right there, and then you've got some deviation with your coastal civilizations of the Maya, the Inca, and then our island nations. And then looking at which cultures and societies use petroglyphs or markings. So maybe you see a thread, maybe you see a trend that I'm not seeing. This is sort of a part of the presentation and the part of my interest in this area that I'm looking to sort of research and develop more, and again, see if there's not only a commonality between how they interpreted the constellations, but really how they determined what kind of structure they would build. I'm also looking at those structures based on a calendar situation. Now, obviously here, you've got a lot of time scrunched down because we're dealing with places like the very far right of Jantam Rantar, which was built in 1735, and then all the way to Nagat Nagat, which is 25,000. It's been dated at its earliest 25,000 before the Common Era. So a huge range here. But again, just a way I'm trying to look at to see if there's any commonalities by time. Was it based on a development of skill or tool that led to more henges being used or more petroglyphs being carved? So breaking that down into the specific locations based along this timeline to see if there are any trends or any common threads. So we're still kind of working on this. If anybody has any thoughts on really any of this, please reach out to me. I love discussing this. I really need to own the shirt that just says, caution, may talk astronomy at any moment. Now we're going to get into the real meat of this talk, now that you've got a little bit of context. Here's your basic look at the entire night sky, and highlighted in white are the constellations that I have looked at and researched within these cultures and within these civilizations. And I wanted to make sure, as I mentioned, that we looked at cultures on either side of the hemisphere in different regions, the island nations, along with the high altitude mountain cultures. So first, we're going to start with Orion, very common, and most commonly depicted as a person, as a man, as a fighter. This one has very little deviation in its depiction. The indigenous Americans of North America referred to this as the slim one. And it was Orion's rising was an indicator of when to plant their crops. And that was dominant within the Navajo culture. The Maya saw Orion as the one lord or the first father. The Caribbean cultures saw Orion rising as an indicator of the rainy season coming to Antigua, and also representative of a prominent cacique or a political leader. The Inca focused on the three stars, and that's a deviation within excuse me, within the constellations is, the depiction of, the three stars are very prominent. Everybody knows of the belt. So the Inca saw them as the three stars of Incan shaman. And that's very, very similar in Australian Aboriginal myth. The three stars were brothers sitting across a julpan or a canoe, telling the story of fishing lore. And the Polynesian cultures, they were the three sons who had exploits similar to that of Maui, who you may be familiar if anybody's watched Moana or has studied Polynesian culture in general. The Egyptians referred to it as Sa, was the god of Osiris. And the sword in South African culture with the Zulu is a long-stemmed flower. So that's how they envisioned the sword, or the nebula, Orion's nebula. And the three stars across the belt, as we think of it, were representative of three zebra, or three big tortoises. In Mesopotamian culture, it was the hero Gilgamesh. And in Indian culture, the Prajapati, a Vedic deity of Hinduism, who was the lord of creation. It was a protector. So very much depicted as a person with some kind of weapon or shield. So associated as we know it as the hunter, very common also in Chinese mythology, Shen, a great hunter or warrior. So Orion is definitely one of the major constellations where you have very little deviation in the general basis of the mythos. Everybody's pretty unanimous on this one from an overall standpoint. Moving on to Lyra, you start learning a little bit of the deviation, and excuse me, it's my hope in the future progression of this presentation, maybe a few months or a year from now, to incorporate some animation in here, or at least some delineating lines to outline what these cultures and these societies saw, because sometimes you gotta question it because of the prominence of Vega and Lyra. The people of the indigenous American regions saw it as the eye of God. And that's sort of a common thread. The Maya depicted it as a bird, or a caklix, a bird demon who poses as a sun god. The vulture goddess, it's depicted in Egyptian mythology. And it gets a little stranger from there. There's some commonalities with animals across the cultures. The Inca saw this as a small silver llama. Again, this is where I'm hoping to add in some lines, because there's some creative license that comes with some of these cultures and how they've depicted these stars and the patterns. The Norse mythology looks at Lyra as a deer constellation, some antler aspects, so possibly have to rotate the constellation about 90 degrees to the left and possibly get some antler action in there. But it's interesting because there are some commonalities. The South African tribe saw Vega and the stars around it to depict an antelope shape. It's even seen as a small bird, Neoloan, malleefowl in Australian Aboriginal culture. But then you get into Mesopotamia and they see this as a lady of the open field, or lady of the wind. So as you'll hear me say through this presentation, there are some depictions that you got to kind of wonder, not only were the stars slightly different as far as a little bit closer together and have moved since stellar drift, what are the stars that also surround them that maybe are not as prominent in the constellation that helped sort of spurn these mythos and the identification. But you'll find it's, whatever culture has identified a constellation as, it doesn't deviate from who they are. These depictions, these stories are very indicative of who these people are, what they do, how they live their lives, and where they live their lives. Another one almost as common across the board as Orion is Ursa Major. And in many ways, the depictions are within the constellation itself in relation to the asterism of the Big Dipper here. Of course, many of us are familiar with the Indigenous American identification, specifically with the Navajo, looking at it as a great bear, Ursa Major. It's there in the name. But then there's some variation here, and you pick up again on the asterism bit. The Norse, Nordic people view this as Karlavagen, which was the Lord's wagon. So it became kind of a chariot identification. It's also associated with Odin's wagon or Odin's chariot. And that's a common thread seen in the Chinese mythos, Duma, mother of the great chariot. But then you get into some interesting interpretation in the Australian Aboriginal cultures, specifically with the Torres Strait people. It's by Dam, and it's a shark constellation. So it's kind of interesting to kind of squint your eyes and look and see how you would interpret the shark. Maybe the arm, or the what would that be? The ladle portion of the asterism. Maybe that's the shark fin. I'm not entirely sure here. In the Inca, it was Yakumama, which was a giant jungle snake. Again, open for interpretation here. The Tuareg of South Africa see it as a camel, whereas other tribes close in the region saw it as an elephant with its trunk extended, which I can make out that one. I can see that one there. So a little bit of deviation on interpretation there. This is another really fun one. Very simple in its design, in its pattern. Corona Borealis, a lot of times seen as a gathering constellation. So it's in the Indigenous Americans, they viewed it as a sweat lodge. So think of it, a little inverted, like a hut, or it was a council of chiefs or a circle dance. So across almost every single culture I've studied, there's that association with, individuals sitting in a crescent Bushmen dining together in South African tribes. In Mesopotamia, sitting gods or standing gods, an association there in, and it gets a little interesting. You get into Chinese mythos, and it's Guansuo, which you have to invert it like the indigenous Americans do into the sweat lodge, but that's, for them, it's a jail. So I'd be interested to know a little bit more story behind that. In the Aboriginal culture in Australia, it's a boomerang. Again, very sensible identification in its shape. And the Polynesian cultures, it's umben. To the people of Papua New Guinea, it's a fishing net. Again, very common with the coastal culture, seafaring culture. So some interesting interpretations there. Now, typically, I feel it's important to say part of this presentation, as I've done it in the past in person, there's an element where I would give everyone who attends a random image of a star field. Everyone would get the same image. And then over the course of the presentation, because I personally am a doodler, I love to doodle and just scribe while I'm listening to talks. So the idea is over the course of the talk to take this star field and to create their own constellation and get a sense at the end of what's their interpretation, what have they made out of it. And it's really interesting to see common threads pop up and some differing threads just based on people in a room looking at the same set of stars. So it really kind of feeds into this research and just how easy it is for people to, as I mentioned earlier, the anthropomorphizing of shapes in the night sky. So dipping a bit below the equatorial line, I want to look at Corona Australis. So very similar shape. Again, you get a lot of similar mythos. For instance, the South Africans, again, you're looking at the tribal elders in a crescent shape or in a house of branches. The Australian Aboriginal Boorong people saw it again as a boomerang, very, very common tool to them. And the Torres Strait people saw this as a part of actually a larger constellation encompassing part of Sagittarius and the tip of Scorpius's tail. So they kind of tied it all together, and it told a huge myth of Tagai. It says he was in charge of his canoe, but his crewmen consumed all the supplies on board without asking permission. And he was enraged and bound them with rope and tied them to the side of the boat and threw them overboard. And that Scorpius's tail represents a sucker fish. While some of the other stars represent the bottom of the boat or bottom of the canoe. So we see in a lot of these mythos that the stories not only help to inform and educate of what these cultures were like, but there's a little bit of morality in these. These are kind of the early Aesop's fables. It's sort of like, telling the story of, of the people in the canoe and the myth of Tagai. It's like, okay, if you're going to go out with people on this boat, on this canoe, you need to make sure they're all in line and they're listening. So there's this sort of moral compass in a lot of ways that constellations in these cultures help to support. And I'm sure it's sort of one of those things that, parents would develop stories. Oh, those constellations rising, that means you have to, start, harvesting the wheat, or, maybe you have to go to bed a little early. I'm sure there's probably a little creative license there. Just a couple more in specific to this one. Again, sort of similarity to a boat or canoe. The Mesopotamians saw this as a mugar, or meaning boat or gondola. And again, getting into the Chinese mythos. So for this one specifically, for them, Corona Australis is located within the northern quadrant of the sky. So it's symbolized by the black tortoise of the north. So again, just the color and the animal and the cardinal direction association, and it breaks down even further. They viewed this as the Southern Crown constellation. Again, very, very easy to see and to depict. Moving on, but you'll see some of these have a very common theme when you're looking at something like Davies, which is just, it's very squiggly, it's very serpentine word in there because it's in many ways viewed as a serpent, or viewed as a river. Obviously, it's where we get the name from. The Maya viewed this as the night lord. The Caribbean cultures, this actually depicted flood season. So they saw this as the flow of water. For the South African cultures, again, this was a very important constellation that enters the night sky at the time of the annual flood of the Nile and the high rivers and tributaries of Africa. So you'll really want to keep an eye out for this constellation when it gets to just the right spot, because otherwise you might get caught in a bit of a pickle and get a little wet. The cultures in India viewed this as a river with a human skull on the banks. Not sure where in this depiction that human skull is. Again, as I mentioned, I want to hopefully add some more interactive elements where I can actually get some information on where the stars are and maybe put some photos and pictures in there. A really beautiful story from the Polynesian cultures, the god Tane. So it was the mythical divider of heavens from earth, or the waters into upper and lower regions. And that was represented here in this sort of river of division. So you had, one side as the heaven and one side as the earth. Just really, really visually stimulating in a lot of ways. And I hope this talk sort of encourages you to go out and look at these constellations in a different light, in a different perspective. Maybe try to put yourself, thousands of years back in time and try to look at it through the eyes of maybe someone in one of these ancient cultures looking up at the sky. And, what stories, what myths would they create from these shapes? Moving on to Sagittarius. In Norse mythology, this was associated with the god of Thor. And Egyptian mythology saw this as a sign of war. This was the time of year when the armies laid out plans for conquests. The South Africans viewed Sagittarius as an archer, a hunter. So obviously a very strong direction towards protection, fighting, combat, conflict. I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay. Now, moving into a common thread that's seen in the Inca, that's also seen in Aboriginal Australian culture, is they looked at the dark constellation, so the voids, and the voids within Sagittarius. For them, they have both sort of a story to help warn. But their dark constellation they see within Sagittarius is the two drowned brothers who were caught canoeing the Sky River, and they were caught canoeing during a storm. So obviously sort of a warning of, be careful when you're going out on the waters, and make sure that the weather is accommodating for your adventure. For the Inca, they saw the dark spots between the tail of Scorpius and the constellation of Sagittarius as a talk, which was a fox. So a little bit of animal interpretation there. Similar to the Caribbean cultures, they saw these as the back legs of a tupi, or a Peruvian jaguar. And in the Pawnee tribe of indigenous America, this was Skiddy Pawnee tribe, they saw this as a bear. And during Sagittarius's presence in the night sky, for some of their tribes, it was regarded as a time for quiet reflection. So these constellations provided not just information with regards to carrying out everyday activities, but they also, upon their presence in the sky, was a time to think and to ponder, which is a nice contrast to some of the other constellations' interpretations of war and aggression. Moving into my favorite constellation, Scorpius. A lot of similar interpretations here. A lot of animal commonalities. A lot of sort of snake references. Again, the Skidipani tribe saw this as a snake. The Maya saw Scorpius as Kimi, a death god, which is interesting. The Tupi in the Caribbean cultures, the stars in the tail of Scorpio announced the fishing season, and also announced the long rainy season that yielded abundance of fish. So when it came into the sky, that was the time to grab your pole and hit the water. Moving into Norse mythology, the constellation was the serpent at the foot of Yggdrasil's root, Yggdrasil being the tree of life that housed the 9 realms of the Viking mythos of Norse mythology. And in South African culture, the star Antares was very prominent for them. That was they called it the fire finishing star. So that, I can only imagine if that was much brighter during the times that these cultures, the tribes of South Africa, were observing them. The Aboriginal Australians bring a little bit of a moral story to it, as Scorpius being 2 lovers who violated tribal law in the Western desert. So a little moral message there. Be careful who you associate with and scurry off into the sand dunes with. According to Polynesian mythology, the curving shape of the pattern of stars represents the jawbone that Maui used to hook the bottom of the ocean, and that he threw this great hook into the ocean and snagged the bottom while his brothers rowed the boat for 3 days, pulling a line until they finally pulled it up, creating the largest of the Hawaiian Islands. So just very, very visually stimulating story. Moving on to, again, some more southern constellations. The simpler constellations yield some of the more interesting interpretation and purposes. Again, the Inca view the dark voids around Crux here, and that it's part of a dark constellation, Utu or Luthu, which is a partridge bird. So again, creative license here, especially with the South African tribes viewed this as giraffes. I don't see the giraffes, but I'm sure they're there. In dark constellation interpretation, Crux was part of the head of the Emu in the sky, and the Maori viewed it as Te-Punga, which is the anchor. So again, you see so many nautical, aquatic relations in our Polynesian cultures and in our Caribbean cultures, and some very interesting takes on what is just a simple set of stars there. Moving on to Perseus. It's interesting, again, combinations here. Not all of the cultures view these stars, obviously these patterns, because of their location, but some of them just weren't very prominent. So the Egyptians saw this as a sacred Persea tree that Ra protected from Apophis. The Mesopotamians see this as an old man. For the Indian cultures, it's Parsurama, so a great warrior born with a battle axe in his hand, and he was said to have exterminated the entire warrior class 21 times, making him one of the most famous of all men in India. So a very huge deviation in this context with the stars of Perseus. The Maya viewed it as a snake, and strangely enough, the Caribbean cultures viewed it as a water boa. So there's a couple of tie-ins there, but definitely one of the constellations where you see one of the largest deviations in interpretation. Pegasus here, some very interesting thoughts are common people of the indigenous American tribes viewed it as a moose. Still looking for where that is. The Caribbean cultures see this and they see a grill on stilts, whereas to the South African tribes, particularly the Maasai tribes, it's a herd of cattle. So it's just, each star represents a cow. So very straightforward, very, very, cut and dry. Whereas with the Chinese cultures, very similar to how we have interpreted Pegasus, for them it's located in the northern quadrant of the sky, so it's part of the black tortoise of the north, and for them it is named Feimazu, which is a flying horse constellation. So very, very similar to our general Greek interpretation. You can see in this context, I have not included Roman or Greek interpretation, mainly just because the majority of us, if you do any astronomical observing or any research into astronomy, those are very common threads. And someday I might do a presentation just sort of tying all the constellations into, the one big story of Greek mythos, because that is fascinating to me. But for now, I did leave them out because they are the common go-to that we're all familiar with. Excuse me. Moving on to Centaurus, again, kind of a little bit lower there. An interesting set of stellar magnitudes here. And again, some interesting interpretations of the stars. A deviation in the Maya seeing Khan, or a god of warriors. The Norse mythology sees it in depictions of a wolf slayer. So you've got some similarity there. But then you move into the Chinese mythos. They see this as a centaur. So they have, again, similar to our familiarity with it being half man, half horse. But then you get into Egyptian mythos, and they see this as a shepherd's crook. So I wonder what part of the stars are they focusing on? Maybe there's a type of food or beverage they enjoyed that maybe enhanced some of their visual interpretation. I'm just, reaching for straws here. For the South African tribes, so these were indicator stars. So these were when they started setting in the evening, the flood season is coming. So very similar to the Egyptian depictions of constellations that help denote the rising of the flood of the Nile. The Inca, again, looked at the voids in between, and this was Ukuchale, which is the llama, and the constellation, so the Alpha and Beta Centaurus making up the llama's eyes. I'm like, okay, I can see that. Thank you for the little assist there. Gemini is one where you're going to see tremendous similarity across almost all of these cultures in almost every single way. It is a set of twins. It is two people. The Maya viewed it as these hero twins, Hanapu and Blanque. And I do apologize if I am completely just smashing to bits these pronunciations. I'm doing my best here, but I speak English and I speak a fair bit of Spanish, and that's pretty much where it ends. So I do apologize if I have pronounced anything incorrectly. For the Norse cultures, this is Freyr and Freyja, the god and goddess, children of Dudur, and Egyptian cultures saw this as Nut, and had a little bit of a story behind it. The twins, lovers locked in a tight embrace. I don't know if that is a twins and also interpreted as lovers locked in a tight embrace, or if it's twin lovers. We'll just leave that there. Of course, by the time we get to Babylonian astronomy, the stars are known, Castor and Pollux, so the great twins. For them, were regarded as minor gods. Meshlamti and Lugaliria meant respectively the one who has arisen from the underworld and the mighty king. So interesting stories there, I'm sure. The cultures of India view this as Yami and Yama, first woman and her twin brother. I found that interesting that the woman was first woman and her twin brother. Yeah, and he's just along for the ride. But across Chinese culture, across Australian, across Polynesian, across pretty much every single one of the societies and cultures that we've been looking at and reviewing, it is unequivocally, unanimously a set of twins, a set of people. Excuse me. I'm gonna take some water again.
That's very interesting.
It's really fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of these stories over time really are built on and rely upon, the magnitudes of these stars, being sort of the anchoring stars. I mean, we would not think of Gemini as being two twins if Castor and Pollux weren't as bright and prominent in contrast to the other stars. It just winds up being that way. Now, I took a little deviation from the constellation aspect because there are three areas within our night sky that have some really fantastic mythos attached to it, and are very prominent for us. So first, we're going to look at the Hyades here. So here we're looking at clusters of people, clusters of individuals. The Western Mono Indians of indigenous America saw this as 6 husbands to complement the image we're going to see shortly, to complement the 6 wives of the Pleiades. For the Caribbean cultures, this was actually interesting. It depicted the beginning of the hunting season, so a gathering of hunters. Excuse me. In the Australian Aboriginal cultures, this was a row of girls divided into 2 groups. And that was an interpretation by the Aranda people of South Australia. And a couple of object identifications. The Polynesian cultures viewed it as Mata, abbreviated form of Mata Keheru, a triangular group of stars in the Hyades was possibly caused to form sort of a spade shape. So there was definitely some association with agriculture and sort of harvesting and so forth. The Caribbean tribes view this as the tapered jaw. And the Inca saw this as boca de sapo, or mouth of the toad, which is very similar to how the Norse cultures interpreted it as Ulafskepter, or mouth of the wolf. And even the Egyptian saw this as a jaw shape. So kind of interesting. You've got this very strong divide of clusters of people, individuals, and this sort of mouth element, this jaw element. Found that fascinating. And again, a star cluster we all know and love, the Pleiades. So as I mentioned, the 6 wives to complement the husbands of the Hyades of the Western Mono Indians. For the Maya, this was Tazbek, which is a rattlesnake's tail. It's a little interesting. Again, another sort of open for interpretation. I love the Caribbean cultures. They have just this beautiful imagery. For them, this was the Karaya saw this as 7 parrots or a swarm of bees. And for them, it marked the start of a new year. And it's also seen in some cultures as, again, a collection of 7 brothers. The Inca saw this as an element of reverence. There's a lot of association with the Pleiades to the Incan shamans. So it was there's a commonality between the sacrifices that were made, sort of regular sacrifices. The Nordic cultures viewed this as Freya's hens, which is very apt because Freya is the goddess of fertility. And in Mesopotamia, it was known as Mumul, or the stars. Our Indian cultures, this was Kritika, or the 6 rishis of the war god Skanda. And Australian Aboriginal culture saw this as 7 fleeing sisters of the Napalchari. And then, of course, I love the complete deviation from any commonality here. The Chinese culture saw this as Mao, or the hairy head of the white tiger of the East. Okay, interesting. And of course, the last direction I'm going to go is the Milky Way, which again just brings up tremendous imagery. I mean, I'm sure we've all looked at it and seen some shape within it, depending on how dark the night sky is. But you get a very strong common thread in how the Milky Way has been interpreted across these cultures. For the Indigenous American tribes, it's very common story of the scattered cornmeal across the ground. The Maya viewed it as a dust of stars or a cosmic monster. And one of the common threads you'll see through this is somewhat of the afterlife. The Maya also viewed it as the road to Zobaba. The Caribbean cultures viewed this as the road of women who went to fetch clay, or the road of souls. So again, a common thread there. The Inca viewed this as Mayu, the life-giving river of heavens, and the counterpart to Urumba River, which is in the Sacred Valley in the Andes Mountains. And of course, the non-illuminated, the dark constellation, the dark voids within the Milky Way, they viewed this as the Great Rift, or the Dark River. The Norse viewed this as the Road of the Dead, which is similar across the South African tribes. The Bushmen of South Africa see the Milky Way as ashes of tossed roasting roots. And for some reason, the Ziohoa see it as raised bristles on the back of an angry dog. Like that. That's kind of an interesting imagery there. Common across Mesopotamian, across Indian mythos, Chinese mythos, Australian mythos. Again, these river associations. The Asangana. Sorry for that complete smattering of that. View this as the Ganges River of the sky. And in Mesopotamian culture, it was the Milky Way was created from the severed tail of this primeval saltwater dragon. That's just, I almost want to draw that and see how that would come out. But my most favorite interpretation of the Milky Way comes from the cultures within the Polynesian islands. They see it as the long blue cloud-eating shark. And I'm going to leave you with that imagery.
That is fantastic, Dawn. Awesome job. And I won't actually clap, but you get the sentiment there.
Thank you, Don. Wonderful.
That's great. I mean, to see the different cultures and how they kind of saw this stuff, it really does. Some make more sense, like you were saying.
Yes. Some take a little bit more creative license.
Yeah, some are wildly, especially the Milky Way one. That's pretty interesting there.
That one is fascinating. And it's funny, as I mentioned, when I've given this talk before, and I've probably given about half a dozen times, I literally just little mini golf pencils, a piece of paper, and everybody has the same set of star fields. They're not differentiated, and it's really fascinating because a handful of people will just doodle and sketch, and you see just out of a room of maybe 40 people how many of them created a butterfly or a dragonfly or some kind of insect, and then you get the person that makes a martini glass. But it's interesting how even in a small room of people that live in the same country, speak the same language, there's still differentiation and a lot of commonality between the images that they see, that they depict. So it's just fascinating, and I'm constantly learning about these different cultures and the stories. I mean, like I said, this could be. I mean, I could take just even one culture and go into their whole society and how they've built it, paired with these constellations, and it's just deviations. So yeah, thank you.
I love it. Yeah, I'm trying to throw up some of these comments, so I appreciate you doing that. Because there's a lot of activity out there in internet land for you. A lot of people really enjoyed this one.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Steve liked the Norse descriptions, and we've got a lot of questions. I've been trying to write them down as they were coming in. So I wanted to show just a couple people that kind of showed up a little late and kind of said hello, everybody. I wanted to make sure that they that they felt welcome. Of course, Sharon Rigsby.
I'm reading one here that it looks like John Reed posted. Do any of the cultures record the color changes in Sirius? I'm not sure. I would definitely have to look into that. One of the things that brings up is questioning what high magnitude variable stars might be interpreted in these constellations. Every time I give the talk, it's like I think of, I need to look into that aspect. I didn't consider that. So that's something I will definitely look into is the if there's any interpretation or any writings about the color changes, but specific to Sirius. I'll have to check that out.
Seriously? I'm just kidding.
Seriously.
Serious? Are you serious? Yeah, John Reed's a great guy. Stephen Hummel says, I will definitely be using some of that material in my future constellation tours.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's like high praise. Thank you, Stephen. Oh my gosh. That's wow.
Yeah, you're gonna be famous out at the McDonald's before too long, Dawn. So there you go. Let me see if I can find some of these questions here. Okay,
comment Joshua Hyman made. So cool that all cultures had to live and accept the dark sky without light pollution. It's funny. The very first time I went out to West Texas to the Texas Star Party, I had not been in dark skies like that in a very, very long time since I was a child in California, the Sierra Nevadas. You just don't have skies like that. And it really made me wonder because it is hard to find your way around a sky littered with stars. You're used to the prominent ones stick out. That's why they're constellations. So, knowing that we do have this light trespass, light pollution in our night sky, it really just, I'm in awe that these cultures, that these societies and civilizations not only built a lot of their agrarian practices on these constellations, but they could see them without artificial light in possibly what could be a planet of Bortle 1.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to think about that. So it's great that you brought that up, Joshua.
Joshua's a great guy. He has, again, I always shout him out. He has a great gemstone channel on TikTok. So he'll show you a gemstone and be like, this is what this is. This is why it's the color. It's great stuff. So check out Joshua on TikTok for sure. I wanted to get to, let's see. There was a couple of questions up here. I hope yes, this is the first one that came in. Stephen Hummel wants to know, is there any evidence that ancient cultures were aware of the effects of precession, which is interesting?
Oh, that is a fascinating question. I don't know specifically. So that's definitely something I would want to look into. Because from what I've researched, the mythos that come from these cultures didn't develop a whole lot over time. They didn't add on to the story as the millennia went on, as the centuries went on. So if they were aware of the effects of precession, it doesn't show up much in their constellation stories. Obviously, we know that, because of stellar drift, several of our constellations are no longer officially recognized, or they've been split up. The constellation Argo Navis is split up into 5 different constellations now. So obviously, precession and stellar drift has caused us to kind of throw some to the wayside. But I'll have to look into that further. I'm gonna make a note of that question. I will come back to you on that.
Stephen always brings the heat, and since I'm on his stuff right here, he says animals and beasts seem to be the common theme in constellations. And this is an earlier question. I know you went through a lot of the people and the canoes. Canoe seems like a very pervasive thing, but he asked, are there any cultures that didn't see animal figures in the constellation patterns? I guess what he's asking is most of their constellation mythos. Is there a culture out there that mainly saw men and women? And
I've definitely found that during Babylonian time. Now, granted, they were looking at astronomy with a much finer eye, with a much more mathematical, educated eye, I think, because of how developed they were. I did not see much in the way of any animal depiction. And it may just be because in a desert, you're not dealing with a whole, lot of animals per se. But I think because of where they were at the time that they were living, a lot of their stories and their depictions are focused on their religious association and affiliations associated with the gods. So there may be 1 or 2 small stories, but that, as far as what I've researched, is probably the one that is the strongest with not having any sort of animal association to the patterns.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And then Frank says, of course, we can't click on the link because it's on a screen, but he says there's a 40,000-year-old possibility. Now, this link is on YouTube on the Deep Sky Dude channel under the chat, so you could go copy and paste it if you needed it there. But physics.org is a pretty reputable site. So, but obviously, cave art back at 40,000 years ago, they were still noting the constellations. I mean, that'd be like you said, there wasn't much light pollution. They really had no Netflix per se. So they had to go out and do stuff at night to keep themselves occupied. And I guess in those skies, how could you miss it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're dealing with with a culture that has no written language, that has possibly very, very little ability to articulate verbally, how do you communicate? How do you determine the passage of time? They didn't have watches, they didn't have Apple Watches or iPhones. So, depending on where these cultures were that far back, you saw the passage of time in animal migration, in temperature change, in possibly what's the right one to say? Deciduous or evergreen, trees and in the flora and fauna. But even then, you're dealing with, seasons that lasted several months, whereas constellations aren't necessarily prominent in the sky for that long of time. So I think for them, that was a very, very fast changing element. The sky changed regularly. So I can see how they may have seen that as an opportunity to note and depict, of course, in petroglyphs and in cave sketching, this profound passage that they observed. But again, totally hypothetical. I wasn't around 40,000 years ago, so I'm just,
Nor was I, believe it or not, nor was I. Sujata, our friend from India, actually says many Hindu temples still carry a small section called Navagraha. I probably butcher it worse than you do, Don, where the sun god is in the center and the planets and some objects are depicted going around it. They had a heliocentric view thousands of years ago. That's fantastic.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, it really makes you wonder where we got this idea that we're the center of the universe.
I wonder where we could have gotten that from. I guess it's because it looks like it, right? I mean, that's probably the whole thing. And I had a question or a comment about Chaco Canyon that I'm sure you're well aware of, Dawn. I've been there. I've actually been inside the temple and walked through it, and it's just a fantastically fascinating place to be. It's almost like it was built in modern times, but made to look
I haven't
old.
been yet. It's definitely on my list.
You definitely should go there, and don't miss the supernova petroglyph, which is actually the park has it labeled as such, where it's a crescent moon with a hand and then a bright star, and that's supposed to depict the Messier 1, the creation of Messier 1, which is, we all know, as the Crab Nebula. Back in 1054, the ancient Chinese, who you brought up as were brilliant amateur astronomers.
Gosh, they were phenomenal.
Yeah, them and the Pueblan Indians. I believe it was the Pueblan that built Chaco Canyon, if I'm not mistaken about that. But they also, here in America, saw the same event that the Chinese were noting on the other side of the planet at the same time, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So for all of those of y'all that know what Chaco Canyon is, go and see that.
That goes, I mean, yeah, that goes into a whole nother, array of study and talk just on, comparing prominent astronomical, that's my son, that's Apollo, prominent astronomical events, and seeing how that translates. Okay, buddy, how that translates across cultures that would be able to see it. That's just phenomenal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stephen Hummel says, that's interesting. Thanks. And then he says, I've been to Chaco Canyon too. It is incredible. And I agree with him 1,000% on that. The place just kind of takes your breath away. And if you go to Chaco Canyon, you've got to go to Mesa Verde, which is not too far north. Chaco Canyon's in New Mexico. Mesa Verde is in the southwestern part of Colorado. Where they built the dwellings inside the cliffs, where the water had kind of carved it out. They built the houses inside the cliffs. It's absolutely stunning, guys.
I have an architectural background, so that alone is just, for me, is just fascinating. It gets into a whole realm of native dwelling structures that just
Yeah, I think that's someplace you should definitely go, Dawn, because when I went to Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, but Mesa Verde specifically, it kind of blows your mind that these people built these structures in those cliff dwellings the way they could, because there's only one way into those canyons, and it was rope, because it's a sheer drop, and then it's a mass cutout, and they brought stones, they brought mortar, people.
I mean, you look at a lot of these situations, especially if you look at any of the ruins in Egypt. I mean, and the structures in the Nordic countries. I mean, you just it's mind blowing. I mean, we still don't know how Stonehenge was built. We still don't know how they got these rocks, this huge long distance. I mean, this sort of harkens to a common thread you see in architecture of the Renaissance period. Like these structures and how they were built, it was a technology and a skill that we have lost. And as technologically advanced as we are in the 21st century, we still can't figure it out. I mean, that's just the fact that they built temples that perfectly funnel in the sunlight on a specific day, and it does that for hundreds of thousands of years. Again, it's like every time I see that depicted, it's like Indiana Jones with the staff and the gem on the top. And
yeah, I love the reference to that, because the whole time you were doing that, I was like Indiana Jones, I guess that's what we grew up on, right?
And shortens it, yeah.
I think I know how those the structures were built, Dawn. I think the answer is pretty obvious, like the pyramids and all this. It was simply aliens, right?
Absolutely. Hey, I'm a Stargate fan. I totally adhere to the alien concept, and I'm hoping that somewhere buried under the dunes of Egypt, we're going to find the cartouche cover plate that covers the Stargate. So yeah,
and we'll be able to travel to all the different worlds just by stepping through water. Just as simple as.
What do they say? A giant ring flushes sideways.
I always thought it was so funny that they had to bring in this guy who was an expert on ancient Egyptian culture in the movie Stargate. And then it took him to figure out those shapes up there were constellations that could have easily been figured out by the top minds of the U.S. military.
Never to bring in the astronomer.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's worse is not only did he figure that out, but he figured that out in the movie by seeing a military personnel holding up a newspaper that had the astrological the astrology foretelling of that day. So yeah, I like that. Lori Sell says ancient aliens. Yes.
Ancient alien. The ancient peoples could not have moved stones. Therefore, aliens. That's my horrible Giorgio Tsoukalos interpretation. So, all right. So if y'all do have some last minute questions for Dawn, there was something in there that you want to get clarified or thoughts that you have on that, throw them down in the comments. Again, all the comments, whether it's on YouTube or the 2 Facebook streams that we're doing, they all should funnel in here, and we can get those comments up to them, up to her.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
And also be sure to follow Dawn on Earthbound Astronomer. Where are you at? I know you're on Facebook, but are you on Instagram?
I'm on Facebook. Let's see, I'm at Astro Earthbound on Twitter. I don't know I have Earthbound Astronomer on Instagram. Still figuring that's it's what all the cool kids are doing right now. And I guess I'm gonna have to move into the TikTok realm. So I'm gonna have to check out TikTok, because you
definitely should, Dawn. And you should
really what it comes down to is any way to get out astronomy to the masses. One of the things that I spoke about earlier about making astronomy accessible to all. One of the things I've been focusing on is I decided to go back to school last year, and so I'm in the process of learning sign language so that hopefully we can do some astronomy outreach to the hard of hearing and the deaf, working on ideas of how to emboss paper and documents and materials so that the visually impaired can feel out constellations and structures. So I mean, there's a lot of juices flowing about it. But when you said TikTok, I think on one of your Observe the Moon live webcasts, and I was like, TikTok, really? And it's like, it occurred to me, it's that quick little soundbite. Like, all you have to do is show people something like your incredible impact on the moon, or I guess it was the plane, the plane crossing the moon, that just gets somebody's attention, and you just need it for a second and get them at the right point and pull them in to this wonderful, absorbing, and in some cases expensive hobby that we all know and love.
Yeah, it's a pricey hobby, but I think you could do great on TikTok, Dawn, especially if you were doing, maybe you took one constellation and then that 59 seconds that you give sort of that cultural background of these sorts of things. I think that would be super fascinating. There are people that do something similar to like that on galaxies and things like this on TikTok, which are great.
Hello, Will.
Astronomy. Oh, did I?
Okay. You froze a little bit, Will.
Thanks, Time Warner or whoever, AT&T or whoever we have our broadband through. But what I was saying is like, I think you could do really well on TikTok with those videos. I think that people would really engage and enjoy those. And I've looked through the astronomy TikTok stuff, and there's not much out there, honestly. But there's no constellation for it.
That's awesome.
You got to do it. You'll have more followers.
I hope to create some really good resources based off of this talk, of this presentation, into some fun handouts that will be up on my site. And as Will was mentioning, earthboundastronomer.com, under resources, everything that I put out, everything that I produce is in PDF form, and hoping to be available soon in Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic. And it's all free. It's open source. It's available. Take it, use it, distribute it. There's no cost to it. Get it out there. Get people interested. Educate.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Dawn. That's incredible. That's why I love observing with you, and that's why I love being one of your friends, is because you're just such a genuine person, and it comes across in your astronomy and the way that you sort of give us, all of us lowly, dumb people on constellations, this amazing information, man. I love it. So great.
Caution, we talk astronomy at any point in time.
Yeah, that's right. I was muted there in that, but I was like, haha, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no. I that is the one astronomy shirt I don't possess, and that'll, yeah, that's coming soon.
Yeah, send it to Dawn. You can send it to her P.O. box at P.O. Box 4. No, I'm kidding.
No, please. I have a very bad astronomy T-shirt habit, as I'm sure probably most of us do. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think Eddie and Kat even may have a bad astronomy habit with T-shirts, because they have some cool shirts as well from our friend Infinities.
Yes, I love Infinities. I have several of those. Great stuff.
Gotta love Infinities, man. If you go to a star party like Okie-Tex, Texas Star Party, wherever, Dirk's out there with Dirk's out there with his shirts. He's got all kinds of different designs. It's fantastic stuff, man.
Actually, I think at Texas Star Party 2019, I decided to only bring like half of the shirts that I needed to get through the week, because I know I would just be buying more shirts.
And you gotta wear the shirt of the star party that you're at, right? I mean, you gotta the shirt that we all get. So yeah, that's mandatory stuff. Absolutely. But for those of y'all that don't go to star parties, this is mandatory stuff. So just so y'all know. Okay, so while we're waiting for a few more questions to file in, if there are any more questions, go ahead and throw those down now, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Eddie, who's going to give us a quick or a nice little, maybe not quick, when we got all the time in the world, really. I'm not trying to.
Honestly, I'm going to cut it short because there's no way I can follow Dawn with
Well, hey, you know, the sun is a very important star, and it could be a part of someone else's constellation way out there, right? Who knows? It could be the brighter star or the dimmer star, or however far away they are.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, because other cultures on other star systems have to have constellations. I mean, they look up at the night sky too. That's like one thing we all share as, species on the side of planets, is we probably have a nighttime, and we're probably like, whoa, what's all that? And then we start making stuff up. So, but with that, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Eddie, and I think he's going to tell us about the sun.
Okay, well, I'm going to start sharing my screen a little bit. And what I've done is I put together a little presentation about the sun and tied it into the solar cycle. So looks like we're definitely starting a new solar cycle 25. And as most of you remember, there's an 11-year solar cycle. So from here to here is about 11 years. And solar activity rises to solar maximum, and it falls to solar minimum. So there's actually a recording of this cycle dating back to the 1700s. I mean, they were taking records as far back as then. Further back, actually, but they don't have them written down per se as solar activity. So this month in June, we had a sunspot almost every day, 12 out of the 13 days so far this month, which is refreshing because we went through some time where we had no solar activity. And it's exciting to think that we're starting up again. This is AR 2765 from June the 6th. We know that 2765 is a member of the new solar cycle 25 because of its magnetic polarity. Sunspots switch polarity from one solar cycle to the next. This is 2765 today on June 13th. And the southern sunspots from old solar cycle 24 had a positive negative polarity. And this sunspot 2765 has a negative positive polarity. So that's how we know that it's from the new cycle. And this is a southern hemisphere sunspot. And so the sunspots start in the east and go to the west from our perspective. And it leads negative, trails positive. But in the northern hemisphere, it leads positive and trails negative. So it's just exactly opposite. in that hemisphere. So a magnetogram shows a magnetic field either coming directly at us or going away from us, from our perspective, just a straight line. The black area shows the regions of magnetic polarity that are moving towards the sun, towards the center of the sun, actually. And the white area shows the regions of polarity moving towards us. So NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and NASA, they got together and they did a forecast for solar cycle 25. And they're forecasting a peak in July of 2025. Now, this is plus or minus 8 months. And they forecast that solar minimum is between, well, is in April of 2020. So it's already passed, but that's plus or minus 6 months. We're right here in June. So it takes at least 6 months of solar observations and sunspot counting after a minimum to know when the solar minimum actually occurred. We can't say this is minimum because we don't have 6 months of data following it. If you look down here, this line is a monthly average of sunspots. And so is this line, the jagged line is monthly average of sunspots. But this red line is a smooth sunspot number, and it's 13 months worth of data for every month shown. So whatever month it is, it looks 6 months back and 6 months forward, and it averages it. So it's a lot of data to take in. So we're here, and we just have an average data back here in November. We don't even know what December's number is until we finish June. So we first saw solar cycle 25, the new one, an active region named 2620. It happened back in November of 2017. This chart shows the dark lines are sunspot counts of solar cycle 24, and the white lines are sunspot counts of solar cycle 25. So 2 independent observatories have to observe it, a sunspot, before it can be named. And sunspots aren't actually named. We name the active regions. Sunspots occur in the active regions. We only see the active regions when they are on the side of the sun facing the Earth. So as the sun rotates, about once every 27 days along the equator, and the same active region can be seen more than once if it lasts long enough. If it circles around the backside and shows up again on the eastern limb, it's given a new number, even though it's the same sunspot. So a long-lived active region could get several numbers. And the present numbering system started in 1972. I don't know what they called them before that, but in 1972, we started the present system, and it's been consecutive since then. In 2002, active region number 10,000 was reached. And the numbers only have 4 digits. So it rolls over like an odometer on a car. So active region number 10,000 just became active region 0. And we started again. 1, 2 disappeared. There's 3, 4. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So there's 2 Astronomical League programs to look for now that the sun is starting to become active again. The first one is the Sunspotter Observing Program, and this is a white light program. You can look at it through a solar film, or you can use a Herschel wedge, something that will cut the energy down of the sun because you don't want to look at it straight on. You'll go blind. But it asks you to make a couple of drawings, and I think it takes, Will, you've done this program, it took maybe 1 solar cycle, like 30 days or something?
Over 2.
Oh, 2.
You have to do it over 2 solar cycles, yeah, so 2 months.
So it's a program,
yeah, 28 days.
a nice pin involved. That's one of the programs. The other one is the Hydrogen Alpha Solar Program. And this one you need a specialized telescope, the Hydrogen Alpha telescope. It shows you a different wavelength of light, and you get to see different things. You see a lot of structure on the limb of the moon. You see a lot of structure on the moon, on the sun. A lot of structure on the sun itself that you don't see in white light. So it's a very interesting way to look at the sun. And I recommend, if you get a chance, check out our club scope and look through it. So that's the program, Will. Things are looking up in the sun, so get out and look up. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer.
Yeah, and Brian chimed in and said, I did not know about the magnetic polarity change. I learned something new. Well, thank you, Brian.
You know, what I thought was interesting is that the magnetosphere, that cycle is actually 22 years. So you go from solar minimum to solar minimum in 11 years, but you have a polarity in one direction for this time. The next cycle is opposite polarity. So that's 11 years. So from here to here, when it resets to the original polarity, is 22 years. So that's another solar cycle.
Fantastic.
Wow.
And then Brian says, I love my Lunt, which is, Lunt is probably the premier hydrogen alpha solar telescope maker. They're made right there in Tucson, and they're good. And actually, Dawn just bought one.
I did. I can't wait to get it out.
Yeah, it's and perfect timing, Dawn, because I mean the sun, like Eddie is telling us here, it's waking back up. It's been in a nap, and its alarm clock is going off, and I feel like it's hitting snooze. It has been for a little while, which is okay. We do that too.
It's gonna start climbing to that 2024. Hopefully, we'll have a lot of really good eye candy on that sun, other than just the eclipse. But I love that.
We have not had many sunspots or active solar regions this year, but the few we've had, 80% of them have been, more than 80% of them have been from the new solar cycle. So there's hope.
Yeah.
We're
getting it. Yeah. And I think you said they're expecting a peak in 2025, which is just 12 months before or after, I'm sorry, the eclipse. So we should be well ramped up. And I think, like Eddie said, you know, those 2 awards from the Astronomical League are so powerful. I've done both of them. It took me a while. I'm not going to lie, because of weather and mostly weather. And I'm a little lazy too. So there were days where it was clear and I was like, nope, I'm not doing this today. But what was cool is, especially for the White Light Award, I drew probably like 10 or so days in a row where we just had a 10-day run. And what's cool is you can actually, on my drawings, you can actually see that one sunspot group move across the sun, because the sun rotates once every, I think, 28 days or so.
It's like 27 days at the equator. It's a long poles.
That's right. Yeah. So you could actually see my little sunspot group kind of change and evolve as it went. And then either I stopped or I had bad weather or it disappeared, one of those. But it was very, very interesting. And I encourage all of y'all who are members of the a local astronomy club or members of the Astronomical League at large, go do those awards, because like we were saying over at the Austin meeting last night, those awards really, really are beneficial to you as an observer. Even if you don't like logging stuff or writing down what you thought of Messier 11 or whatever, you know, they really do help you hone your own astronomy. Even if all you say in your description is, wow, great galaxy, next, you know, over time, you'll, because a lot of my early observations of that. Yeah, faint fuzzy, not really there, next.
Slightly fainter fuzzy. I love that Brian, you're plugging those 2 programs. And I'm personally very excited to get started on those, because we're reaching that next climb. And I'll also put in, just because I'm Alcor for my group and for the Austin Astronomical Society, I will definitely put in a plug for the constellation program, which was actually one of the first 2 I did that really helped me learn the sky using telescopes, the Messier list and the constellation list. When you do those two lists, I mean, you become a pro. You will know how to navigate the sky. You will know all the real fun eye candy up there to show folks at outreach events.
No, absolutely.
About doing a program from the Astronomical League is it gets you to use your telescope. It puts your eye to the eyepiece.
Yes.
And like Will says, you know, your descriptions might be very fundamental, and that's okay, but you're seeing things you won't have seen before because you didn't have any structure to your viewing.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm a proponent. I mean, can't do it right now, but I will forever tout astronomy is always better with friends, especially friends that have different eyepieces and different telescopes than you do, because it's going to look completely different in an 8-inch Dob than a 6-inch refractor. So definitely a huge fan of spreading that love when it is appropriate.
Absolutely, when it is time. Yeah, when it is time. But
when it is time, you all have the biggest star party ever.
Yes, probably Okie-Tex will be massive if it goes forward. I bet you there'll be a lot of people there. I'm just wagering a bet on that. But
I will say,
like
Texas Star Party 2021, we're doing happy hour for like 3 days straight.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough star party. We're not going to get a whole lot of astronomy done probably, but we'll get a whole lot of socializing done. That's for sure.
It's funny for a hobby and an activity that is typically done in complete darkness, where you don't see your friends, how easy and how quick it has been to miss everybody I observe with. So,
no, absolutely. Like I said, I was at the Prude Ranch for what would have been Texas Star Party this year. Mm-hmm. My friend and I, Mark Farage, went up there. We actually went to the X-Bar Ranch for half and then the Prude Ranch for the other half because the weather at the X-Bar turned on us. So we just drove 3.5 hours west and went to the Prude Ranch. And so we ended up having 9 or 10 days, whatever it was, straight. And I can tell y'all that when we were at the X-Bar, it was just me, Lonnie Mosley, a member of our club, and Mark Farage. We were just out there hanging out alone. And then when we went out to the Prude, there was maybe 10 people out there when we got there on the upper field. None of the other fields were populated. Nobody else had telescopes out. And it was fun, but it was eerie, and it felt a little empty. You know, that human interaction where it's like, Dawn, get over here and see this galaxy. You know, it's that, you know, and it's a giving and taking of ideas and knowledge. And, you know, like so many have said, the star party is the night sky, but it's mostly the people.
Absolutely. So, oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I have done solo observing, you know, it's fun, but it's not the same. And it's very, I don't know what the right word would be. I mean, it's intoxicating. I mean, you really get an excitement and you feed off of each other's excitement. You know, I will never forget the first time we took our club had acquired a 25-inch Dob, huge Dob. And we took it out for a test run at my first TSP back in 2014. And just the charge we got from nailing what was it? The Omega
Centauri.
I mean, all of us, I mean, you're just vibrating, you're just jittering. And it's like you're looking through a piece of glass at some reflecting light off of a mirror of little tinier lights that just, you know, it's invigorating. I mean, you get on that astronomy high and, you know, as you well know, Will, you can observe for 8 hours a night on a telescope and it feels like it's been a few minutes. You know, it's
absolutely
a great hobby we all share. It's
yeah,
really
and if the sky will allow me to view that long, I do it every time. You know, my earliest night during that 10-day run was, I think, 3 a.m. Every other night was dawn. Not you. Every other night was until dawn. It was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. And at the end of it, Mark and I, like, it was like Saturday night or Sunday night. I think we stayed like an extra day because we didn't want to drive back through storms. And we were just so tired. We just sat there and the telescope is unwrapped and next to us. And we just sat there in chairs, like, you know, like looking up at the Milky Way, just like, oh, I can't do anymore. You know, like I can't like this anymore. That's
it's okay.
yeah, like we get stars, you're there. Okay, we're done. No, but it was a beautiful feeling to kind of be a little bit astronomied out in that particular moment. Of course, after an hour of us sitting there in the chair, we were like, oh, let's look at this galaxy, you know, got after it. But it was kind of like one of those moments that you just kind of, you got to take a break sometimes. But you know, that's what the daytime is for, right? So unless you're a solar astronomer, and then it just
and night one for us when we travel, because I travel to TSP with Brian, and we've kind of had a pretty steadfast rule that, you know, you've been driving for 7.5 hours. You've been prepping for TSP since pretty much the last day of TSP the year before. And so our big thing is, you know, roll out the hammock and just appreciate the night sky in that first night. Unless the weather's looking iffy, and if it's a really great sky, you better get it in just in case. But it's sometimes you just got to sit back and just take it all in with your
absolutely.
Good old
That's strong advice from a seasoned observer right there, or seasoned observers, I should say, Brian and Dawn. And I met Brian and Dawn at TSP 2014. Actually, that was when I first was introduced to them, and you know, that was my first TSP as well. And I've been every year since, even the year that didn't exist, which was 2020. So, but it's a great star party. And if we should have like a massive TSP reunion with all of us that have been to TSP, I'll jump on a live stream like this and just,
that would be fantastic. That would be great.
Would be. And also I want to, go ahead.
We always, for the Austin Astronomical Society, one of our goals is on either the April or if the May meeting happens far enough ahead of TSP, but typically about the March meeting, we'll do sort of a primer. It's like, okay, this is your first time at TSP. Here's what you got to know. And I remember my first big steadfast rule that was told to me by a seasoned astronomer at TSP was, okay, so you're going to be out there and it's going to be dark. And the Milky Way, you know, it's not quite up yet, and you're wondering when it's going to come. And you start seeing clouds in the sky, and you start putting away your scopes. Nope, stop. Make sure it's not the Milky Way, because otherwise you're going to have to pull everything all out again.
That's right. Yeah, it does kind of appear to be, you know, sort of clouds on the horizon as that does come.
And
because
then when you pull in your focus, you're like, no, it's just billions of stars.
Yeah, just a few hundred dozen at least, doing their thing. So one thing, before we close out, I wanted to share this little tidbit with y'all. We have to kind of show this. So one day, I make these long form videos on star parties and stuff, and this is the 2019 one, the last official Texas star party that happened. I'm eating dinner in the mess hall, and everybody's looking outside going, whoa, what's going on? And I look back, and there's a Jedi and Sith lightsaber dueling to the death outside and I'm like, and it was Brian and Dawn, and they had full gear. They had a choreographed routine. It was May the 4th be with you, absolutely. And that was such an awesome thing. And when they came in, they were all out of breath, and I'm eating, and I had like chicken fried steak in my face, and I was like, why didn't y'all tell me y'all were doing that? We could have filmed it. And they're like, we could do it again. And so I'm like, all right, let's go do it again, but let's do it at the gate. And so this is sort of the product of that. You can see they had an awesome little choreographed routine. I took the video, and this was one take, y'all. This was one take that Brian and Dawn did for us. And it's just super, super awesome. I've always wanted to open a star party with a star party intro, but I'd never envisioned there being a full-on lightsaber battle to go with that. I thought it would just be the crawler and then it would be over. And but they ended up hooking us up with this awesome thing. And I had to go in and animate the lightsabers, which I'll tell you took me 18 straight hours. And it still wasn't quite perfect, but it ended up being okay. Yeah, and so thank you, Brian and Dawn, for that, because that made an epic star party intro for sure. I think one of the better ones, and you can see sort of I was flying out towards Fort Davis from the Prude, so epic stuff.
Used to steal my husband's lightsaber for a week.
Yeah, and those were really nice, by the way. They were.
Oh yeah, no, they're
combat ready.
high end. They make the sounds when they impact and everything. That was a lot of fun. And I mean, to be featured in a Will TSP video, it's like, oh, I have arrived.
Oh, come on! But that was awesome
totally.
because I mean they had like you saw, they had full Jedi and Sith. We're not sure who won though against the light and the dark side Jedis. We're not exactly sure who won. Maybe there'll be a part 2 in the future where we find out who actually is the victor. Yeah, so we'll
have a cliffhanger for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and what's funny is we never see anything. I hid some Star Wars references in the actual thing, like different sounds and stuff. There's a scene where Dawn rides Brian's electric motorcycle off into the distance.
I heard the sound.
And I put the speeder bike sound like, you know, she was kind of driving off.
Speeder bike.
So if you go back and watch that one, check out, see how many of those Star Wars references you can spot, because I had a lot of fun just kind of Easter egging as I was going along. Yeah. So, but I think that's about it. I don't see any questions or anything coming in. So, Dawn, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This was such an honor. And like I said, I firmly believe we need to start having more interaction, more cross-pollination, as I'm calling it. I haven't come up with a better term yet, of folks with our meetings. I know we do meet on the same night, so that might be a challenge, but I'm really thankful, Will, that you were, fantastic presentation on your outreach and everything that you do within, Asset there, and your videos. I know our club just loved the presentation last night, and I know a lot of you from Asset made sure to come on over to our side. But I just thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me share my love of constellation culture. Like Will said, if there are any other questions or any comments, or you want to just talk about it, I'm happy to do so. But thank you so much for having me tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And thank y'all for having me. I mean, this was a really cool event. Hopefully some of the Austin people got a chance to make their way over.
And I've seen some familiar names, so I hope so. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. That's cool. You know, there's a bunch of Texas clubs, and so we should all stick together because we share the same massive state, which is really cool. And I think all astronomy clubs should really band together, but especially us Texas folk, because there's some kind of weird pride in that, I guess. But I like it. So it's cool.
But I love you had some amazing folks on tonight from all over the world. I mean, that's one of the benefits of, having to do virtual meetings is it has opened up things like astronomy meetings and astronomy on taps and, your live videos. It's an age of this high level technology, and let's use it to our full extent and share the knowledge, make astronomy accessible to all.
Yeah. And that's the point. That's the whole point of outreach, is to just get it out. Whatever you're doing in astronomy, like Dawn, researching cultures with constellations, whether you're just putting your iPhone up to a telescope to show your friends the moon, that's all outreach in all various forms. And we need everybody who wants to do it as much as they can, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, whatever.
You don't have to know it all.
Right. You just have to know one little nugget of info and then plant that in their minds, because the public doesn't know half of the stuff that we know, just because of the years we've spent doing this, right? So it's our job to literally hand them this information, and hopefully it changes their lives like at one point we had our lives changed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And hand it to them, and also be willing to support them to learn more. And then I think that's a huge element of astronomy and of science and of STEM, especially in youth. If you've got a young child coming up to your eyepiece and they are just blown away, and their parents are standing there like, I don't know what they're doing, you get with that kid and you get them the resources they need, because we help plant the seed, but we also have to help make sure that plant grows.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's fantastic, Dawn. Spoken like a true veteran of the hobby. That's absolutely for sure. Somebody who's done it a lot.
Geek pride.
It was nice being a part of this. Thank you for inviting us. Dawn, it was a pleasure listening to your presentation. It was fascinating.
Oh, likewise. I've learned new stuff about the sun, and it just gets me more excited for this new solar session.
Yeah. And Will, thank you again for bringing us all together. You're awesome with this. Truly, you are.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It means a lot. Having those appreciation comments from people that I respect and trust, and all of y'all on here are people that I deeply respect and trust. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Eddie and Kat for the treasurer's report. Our club's doing strong. That's great news. I mean, even in a downturn year, we're still boosting up, and our membership is like the biggest it's ever been. It's crazy. And I think that speaks to the need of astronomy now more than ever.
Absolutely.
And when we get back, when everybody's back to their regularly scheduled program, where we're all meeting in the same building and doing all that, I feel like it's going to be even more special to us, because maybe over the years we've gotten jaded to being able to go to the mall or to a store without a mask on. And maybe when those days return, maybe we'll keep them a little bit more cherished in our hearts, I guess, because that's how I'm gonna feel. I know when I get back out into the world and we start doing this again. But thank you guys for joining us. Thank you guys all in the chat room who have hung out with us, especially Brian Lippincott, and hanging out with us and having a good time. For all y'all that posted questions and everything, thank y'all for coming in. Thank you, Lori. Good to see you. Lori's a longtime member of ASCED as well. And that's basically it. This concludes the June meeting. We're already into June, which means we're halfway through the year, because isn't June the 6th? Yeah, so that's the 6th month of the year. We're halfway through that month. It's like
almost summer solstice.
Oh man, it's crazy, right? And so I appreciate all of y'all watching. Thank y'all for everybody who has joined us. Sharon Rigsby, the director of the planetarium here in Beaumont, where we used to meet, where we will meet once again as soon as all this passes. It's good to see you, Sharon. We really appreciate you being here. There's Lisa. Hey, thank you, Lisa, for coming. We appreciate you, Lisa, as well. Keep looking up, guys. I encourage you to reach out to Dawn if you have questions, if you have constellations that you think should be amended, because I definitely do. I think we should all work on that as an astronomy community. But reach out to her, follow her on all the social medias at Earthbound Astronomer. I'll put that banner up real quick. There you go. Cool. You can find her on all of the social medias. Go follow her, man. Because, yeah, and TikTok too. Let me know when you get on TikTok, and I'll do what I can to help you through that. If you have any questions, it's a very basic.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. No, I've already been told by high school students that Facebook is for old people. That hurt. That hurt.
Man, it's weird. If you live long enough, I guess you see your heroes turn to villains. Isn't that how the saying goes, or something like that?
I mean, you all saw. I mean, I got a 9-year-old, so there's a whole lot of that coming. Of like, Mom.
Apollo's 9 already.
He's 9. Yeah, and he looks like an 11-year-old. Yeah.
I remember when he was just a little tyke. I mean, I've never met Apollo, but I've always heard about him. Every time I've hung out with you, Dawn. So that's amazing. 9 years old.
He was born and raised in Austin Astronomical meetings. Yeah.
That's excellent.
He attended every single executive committee and general assembly meeting until he got to the point where he could walk and talk. And then it was just like, no.
No, not, but then he'll have a resurgence, right? He'll have a resurgence.
Oh, absolutely. He's already very, very interested in astronomy and does not like it when I go to star parties without him. So a few more years, and hopefully we'll see him at a Texas Star Party.
Yeah, I was about to say, eventually you won't be able to. He'll be sneaking in your luggage, and he'll just be there.
Yeah.
He'll be
somewhere into the Valley of the Dobbs and come back later with tales of hanging out with Larry Mitchell and the Scopes and
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank y'all again for coming on tonight. Thank you, Dawn. This is amazing stuff. I hope that a lot of y'all that watch this maybe came in at the end. This will all be uploaded online, so you can go watch it at your leisure at any time. If there was something Dawn did that you want to go rehash and research yourself, go watch it again. There you go. Yeah, it's always going to be on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. So, awesome. And we appreciate y'all watching. Thank y'all for joining us. And I guess until next time, unless anybody has any parting words, Dawn, why don't you send us off?
My parting words are always very simple: clear skies, clear, dark skies.
I love it. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Eddie and Kat. We will see y'all on the next month's edition of the Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas live stream. I'm pretty sure we'll be meeting online for the foreseeable future, at least for the time being. Probably we'll start back at 2021. Who knows? But we love you guys. We thank y'all for joining us, and we'll see y'all on the next one. Clear skies, just like Dawn said.
Bye, Eddie. Bye, Kat.
Bye, Dawn. See you later, Will.
Bye.